Hey folks, welcome back to Audioholics YouTube. I'm Gene Della Sala, the president of Audioholics, and today we're here with
Hugo Rivera, vice president of marketing. Gene, great to have you back over here today.
It's great to be back covering some products today.
I think today it's kind of like a historical moment because we're actually going to be covering one of actually our first Atmos receiver here. Atmos enabled.
If you guys on Audioholics have read my very comprehensive review, we did a 7,000 word review of this Denon receiver. It's the AVR-X5200W. What a mouthful, Hugo.
It really is.
So yeah, we are the first in the industry to be reviewing Atmos equipment, and we have a lot to say.
Yeah, it looks like a pretty jacked up sort of receiver. What can you go ahead and tell us about it in terms of capabilities, channels, etc., etc.?
Well, it's got a lot going on for it. You know, it retails for $2,000. It's currently their flagship, but they are coming out with a 7200 model pretty soon. That's going to probably surpass it. But right now, you know, it's the top of the line for Denon, and it's a little bit on the light side, to be honest with you. For a $2,000 receiver, I'm used to picking up a Denon with two hands. I was able to carry this 31-pound receiver upstairs in the Audioholics showcase home with one arm.
Yeah.
So it's unusual to see a Denon be a little lighter. So I was initially a little skeptical. I was like,
sure.
I felt like they would maybe be cutting some corners. But we'll talk a little bit more about that as we get into this review.
Awesome. Well, what kind of listening test do you do with this?
Well, you know, because it's Dolby Atmos, Denon was really cool. They supplied us with 4 Atmos modules, and those are the DefTech A60s. And what I did was I set it up in a 5.1.4 configuration, which is 5 main channels, or the beds, and then 4 object channels, or the height channels, with the Dolby Atmos modules, where you actually place them on top of the front and surround speakers.
Right.
So we tested it in 2 environments. We tested it in the Audioholics showcase room, which is what we're in now. It has 8-foot ceilings. It's an acoustically controlled room. And then I wanted to see what it would sound like in a regular room. So we tested it in the Audioholics family room system, which is an untreated room. It has 10-foot flat ceilings, and it's a big open room.
Right.
So we really got a good feel for it. And then, you know, we threw in some in-ceiling speakers to see how it compared to the Atmos modules. And, you know, we'll talk a little bit about that, but we'll actually have a separate video on listening test to compare. So let me just give you a little bit about the setup on this receiver. Before you get into any listening test, the important thing is to set it up. And, you know, normally I like to thumb through a manual. Well, in this case, Denon now provides you with a PDF.
Yeah.
350-page land of confusion.
I remember the phone call. You called me frantically. You were not a happy camper.
Yeah. I mean, I tried to open this PDF. They had speaker assignments. They changed the nomenclature on how they were calling the Atmos speakers, the Dolby speakers, surround speakers, and the diagrams are like all bunched together. I mean, it was just a complete horror show.
I have to say, when I opened that up, Gene, and you know, both of us are technical people.
Yeah.
I had issues with it, unfortunately.
Yeah, and I even fired off an email to Denon just saying, you know, what are you guys thinking with this manual? And so, you know, their response to me was use the receiver setup assist. And I'm like, all right, usually that's, you know, I'm not into the auto setup too much.
Right.
So I gave it a try. I gave it that old college try.
Yes.
like our old college professors used to say, right?
Right.
So the receiver setup assist is very useful. It actually sets you through a series of questions on how many speakers you have connected, where they're located. It made the process very palatable, and it really did help me understand what was going on. Now, there were some issues, and I informed Denon about this, and they were doing a firmware upgrade. Number one is you put it in Dolby Atmos mode, thinking, hey, now I could put it in the Dolby Atmos speaker configuration and use these modules. You got to set it for 9.1 or the just 9.1 configuration to get to that option to set it up for the Atmos reflected speakers. So it's very confusing. Plus, their nomenclature, like a typical nomenclature for Atmos, is the main channels dot the Atmos channels dot the subwoofer channel. I'm sorry, dot the subwoofer channel dot the Atmos channels. They didn't have that in the manuals. They didn't have that in the receiver setup. So, you know, Dolby's been pumping us with this new nomenclature for how many months now?
Gee.
And it's nowhere to be found in the literature.
Manual, yeah.
So I don't know what Denon's going to do with the upgrade on the firmware. I'm looking forward to it. But my advice now, when you're setting this receiver up, most users, unless you're using in-ceiling speakers for your Atmos channels, you're going to want to set it for the 9.1 mode or the 11.1, depending on how many speakers you have. Now this guy's got 140 watts times 9 channels. You could do up to 11 channels of processing. If you add a 2-channel amp, which I would recommend, if you add a 2-channel amp, do it to the front channels.
Right.
Preserve that stereo image as best as you can, get the best sound from your front speakers, and then reassign the amps. So you could do, you could do a 7.1.4 Dolby Atmos setup, or if you're not using all the amps, you could reassign them to other zones. Now this has some of the most flexible speaker management system we've ever seen, an amp configuration system we've ever seen, and a receiver, especially at $2,000. I mean, you got 9 channels, you got 3 zones, you got 3 HDMI outputs. One of them is assignable to a second zone.
It's awesome.
It's pretty incredible. There's a lot of flexibility going on at 2K that you didn't necessarily have 5 years ago.
And less weight.
Less weight, yet, that's a little bit of a downside in terms of they shrunk the power supply a little bit. They shrunk the heat sinks a little bit, but they're actually using a pretty high quality aluminum extruded heat sink, and they have a bunch of fans under it. And we'll get a little bit more into the bench test after the listening test, and it did pretty well considering its size. So the first thing I recommend, run the receiver setup assist, step 1. Next, run Odyssey. Get the little microphone out. Now Odyssey's pretty cool. They've done some advancements over the years with their room correction system. It's Odyssey XT32 actually. One thing I like about what Odyssey has done now is they tell you to place the mic in the primary listening position, right? Well, a lot of times you would go to set it up, it'll start doing the sweeps. People's subwoofer levels were too low, so it would crank that up. Then it would have to crank the channel levels for the main channels all the way down. Well, now Odyssey says, well, you know what? Turn your subwoofer on. Keep adjusting the volume till it hits 75 dB. Okay? You do that, then it takes that as a baseline to set the rest of the channel, so you don't get these screwy channel level calibrations.
Got it.
So that's cool. That's new. It's new for us because we haven't reviewed a Denon product in about 5 years with Odyssey. So this is new for us. It might not be new for some of you guys that are Denon fans. But another thing it does is, for years people would be placing the microphone all over the room. And, we've always talked to Odyssey about this. You can't. You have to keep it within a close proximity because you're trying to do high frequency correction. Well, Odyssey's cool now because they tell you don't vary the mic position more than 2 feet from the primary position. So that gives you about a 12-foot area of coverage from the primary position, which is good enough for most people. If you have 2 rows of seats, I would say calibrate it for the money seats area. And let the mother-in-law sit in the seat that's not so optimized, right? I mean, that's how I do it anyways. So sorry, Mom, but so yeah, Odyssey is a good start point. I ran it. It did the levels correctly. It did the delays correctly. The Atmos speaker delays, I can't really verify it did those correctly or not because it measured the physical distance to the speaker. It didn't account for the fact that the sound is allegedly bouncing off like a flashlight from a ceiling and back down.
Right.
So you don't really know if it's giving you the proper propagation delay. Denon claims they're adding a 9-foot calibration into it. Can't really confirm that, Hugo, to be honest with you. But it did set all that stuff up. The bass management was good for the most part. It set the it set the Atmos speakers crossover down to like 110 hertz. You and I both know if you're trying to bounce sound off of a speaker firing up, you don't want this thing playing down to 110 hertz.
Right.
So I set it all the way up to the max setting of 250 hertz. And I recommend that if you're using this type of speaker technology, you don't want low frequencies going through it.
No.
And in fact, Denon even offers a large mode, which is kind of ridiculous. You don't want to use a large mode for reflective speakers. So set them to small if Odyssey didn't do that. Set the Atmos speakers to the maximum crossover setting.
Got it.
And we did that, and we did some listening tests with Odyssey on and off. And I'll tell you, Odyssey greatly improved the sound of these Atmos modules because these were the weakest link in our demo experience. Having the Dolby speaker technology really took away from the Atmos effect.
And we'll cover more of that in the next video that we'll talk about. Yeah.
But to get more back to this receiver, when we used it with ceiling speakers in an Atmos configuration, it was quite an impressive experience. And it really filled this room up nicely. I did some dedicated 2-channel listening tests, and I even hooked them up to our $50,000 reference speakers that are 4 ohm. And it didn't sound anywhere near the refinement of our 2 kilowatt monoblock amps, but it's not supposed to. It's a receiver.
Right. Exactly.
But it did really well, and it drove those 4 ohm speakers, and I had the impedance switch set for 8 ohms. The one thing I can't stress more enough.
That's what I was going to go ahead and ask. What about that impedance switch?
stay away from it. Don't even know that it exists. Delete it from the manual. Don't mess with the impedance switch. The impedance switch, in my opinion, is useless. Okay, the only reason why it's there is so they could get the UL approval for heat dissipation into a 4 ohm load. And all it's doing is it's basically strangulating the power of the receiver. Right. So let's talk about the bench test, since we're talking about this. So, you know, this is rated at 140 times 9. They claim it's a monoblock construction, and it kind of is. I mean, each amplifier channel is on its own card, but it taps off of a common power supply, so it's really not a true monoblock amp.
Understood.
But we did verify. We measured power into 2 channels. It gave the spec 140 watts at 0.1% THD plus N, good rating. We checked it with 7 channels driven. It put out about 78, 80 watts, 8 ohms, again good. I checked it at 4 ohms. It put out 200 watts a channel at 4 ohms. I also did dynamic burst tests, and I got like almost 300 watts at 4 ohms, which is impressive. Now, it's got this little sticker on the front that says 250 watts, and I'm like, okay, what is that all about? Well, I was able to confirm it. If you do 1 channel driven at 10% at 1 kilohertz, it'll do 250 watts.
Got it.
So the sticker is true.
Yeah.
You know, to a point.
A little bit of marketing there.
Yeah, it is marketing.
It's okay.
I would personally, if I bought a receiver like this, I would just take that sticker off. I mean, come on. That's like wearing a shirt on how much you could bench. Okay? So, you know, the bench tests on this thing are pretty good. When we put it in the 4 ohm setting, it was a nightmare. This receiver could only put out 25 watts in 1 channel and 18 watts times 7. It is, I have to congratulate Denon. It is the worst impedance selector switch ever that I've ever seen in a receiver. Don't use it.
Got it.
Did I say don't use it? Don't use it.
Liquid paper the thing in every single part of the manual.
Doesn't matter what impedance your speakers are, just leave it at the default setting. Give this receiver plenty of ventilation and you're good to go.
About ventilation, were you able to cause a situation where you actually turned on the fans?
That's a good question, and I tried. You know, I pounded this thing with the loads. I pounded it with my 4 ohm speakers, and I'm talking 6,000 cubic foot room. I never heard the fans turn on.
That's awesome.
Now, I did leave it open on the floor. It was open ventilation, so it didn't need the forced cooling. If you stick this in a rack, yeah, you're probably going to have some forced cooling. You got to want to leave a few inches top on the sides if you can. The fans might come on. So it's a good precaution. I haven't had a problem with it. The receiver is pretty efficient. It even has an eco mode, so if you want to consume less power at low levels of power, when you're running the receiver at low volume, it'll actually dissipate less power. And then when you crank it up, if you leave it on auto, it turns off. Don't turn the eco mode on all the time, because again, it's another limiting. The more limiting you do these receivers, the worse it's going to sound when you start driving, and especially when you're driving nine speakers.
Oh yeah, absolutely. You need the power. We need more power.
Yes, power is important, and I have to say that even though this thing only weighs 31 pounds, the bench test impressed me. And you know, the preamp outs on it, it's got preamp outs for every channel. If memory serves, you can look at our bench test. I think it put out 4 volts RMS,
wow.
You know, unclipped. You only need 2 volts RMS to drive the majority of amplifiers on the market. So I mean, this is good as a pre-pro if you want to use it as a pre-pro. It's got the Analog Devices DACs. It has 4 Shark processors in it. That's why it's doing all the Atmos and you know, it's doing all the Odyssey. You know, other than that, a couple of minor things I found I wasn't 100% thrilled with. If you want to talk about that.
Yeah, absolutely.
The one thing I noticed is, and this is because it's doing Dolby Atmos and it requires a lot of MIPS, is if you're not using this receiver in pure direct or direct mode, it downsamples all high resolution audio down to 48 kilohertz. Now Odyssey generally does that anyways, but even with Odyssey off, it's still downsampling to 48K.
Okay.
So just keep that in mind if you're a purist and you're running SACD or DVD audio, you want to do it, you know, with pure direct on or direct on. But of course, you don't get Atmos when you run it.
Yes, that's the issue.
But you know, considering there's only 1 or 2 discs of Atmos out now, anyways.
Yeah, I don't think a lot of people are going to be running Atmos. Not right now, anyway.
Unless you're running, unless you're running the Dolby upsampler. And here's the weird thing: Dolby got rid of ProLogic 2X, got rid of ProLogic 2. Now they went back to like the 80s nomenclature and they're calling it Dolby Surround Up Mixer.
Okay.
Dolby Surround is like, remember, you know, before ProLogic back in the 80s. So they claim it's a better enhanced version of ProLogic 2. It's, you know, It's their newest algorithm. And we tested it for movies, and we tested it for music. Now, the funny thing about it is they won't activate, if you're running wide channels, which most people really aren't, they don't activate that because they want to preserve the stereo image. Yet they run the Atmos modules. And, you know, per our listening test, the Atmos modules tend to muddy the sound field of your, whatever speaker it's on top of, you're losing some of the focus as a result of the sound radiating everywhere.
Right.
So there's really no option to shut those off. And unless you actually go into your speaker setup and shut it off. And at the time we did this review, we didn't know there was a center adjustment to turn the center channel off and dump it to the main channels. So what I found was when we listened to music, it was dumping too much info into the center channel, and it was taking away from the stereo effect. Well, just like ProLogic 2X, you could turn off the center channel. We didn't know that when we did our listening test, unfortunately, because it's buried into the sound parameter menu, which used to be a hotkey on older Denon receivers and is now not.
Okay.
So keep that in mind. I would recommend, if you're going to use the Dolby Surround Up Mixer, to, before you start using it, just leave it in 2-channel mode, go into your surround parameter menu, turn off the center channel, you know, with the setting on that, and you can see that in our review. We talk about that.
That's good.
And you'll get good results from music. Personally, you know, the Atmos modules, hit or miss with that. If you have the in-ceiling speakers, it's a much better effect. And even for movies, you know, if you're running 5.1.4, you probably will want to use the Dolby Surround Up Mixer for your standard Blu-ray movies.
Right. What can you tell us about the wireless capability?
Yeah, you know, that's another cool thing. It's got dual antennas. It'll do Bluetooth. It'll do AirPlay. You can take your iPad and stream music directly to this wirelessly.
It's really kind of like a jack of all trades, huh?
It is. It is. And, you know, for this price, you're getting a lot of features. You're covering everything. You're getting Spotify. You're getting every type of thing you could stream. Basically, will support it.
Excellent. In terms of other formats, I believe that it will be able to support the Oro 3D as well.
That's going to be a future upgrade. It's going to be, they're saying about a $200 to $250 upgrade, and it's going to come in December. Nice. So yeah, that's, you know, hopefully that surround format takes off, because we do like how they do their speaker assignments on it, and I think there's a lot of potential. Why not have both?
Yeah.
Denon's currently the only brand on the market in receivers that are going to be supporting both surround formats.
I think it's pretty brilliant, because it gives the consumer, you know, the choice.
Right.
And we're all about choices.
Yeah.
So I think that's pretty great.
I noticed you were looking at the back panel. What do you think about it?
The back panel is pretty jacked up. I mean, it's like, it's amazing. It's
got a lot of stuff on it, let me tell you. It's got like 11 speaker connections. You can only use 9 simultaneously, but still, you could, you know, all sorts of configurations of how you do your speakers. It has legacy support for composite, component video.
That's nice. It's
got, I think, HDMI inputs, 3 outputs. The cool thing is it has ISF calibration stuff built in the video, and it'll upsample to 4K. It even supports HDMI 2.0, so it supports the 18 gigabits per second. But of course, there's no source material in that yet. And then when it does come, it's going to have HDCP 2.2. which the silicon doesn't even exist yet. So if you want native 4K, you're going to be playing the waiting game, and you're going to probably have to upgrade your receiver again and all your equipment. But that's another topic that we'll cover in a different video.
Right. All in all, I think it's a pretty awesome product then.
It really is. In my opinion, it's one of the best Dolby Atmos receivers on the market right now, especially under 2K. You know, there's a couple others I would consider, but this is top of the list. Top of the list.
Awesome. Anything else you'd like to add?
No, I think we covered it, other than the fact that the receiver, the user manual, not so good. Use the receiver setup wizard. And, you know, the remote control's basic. You probably want to get yourself a learning remote. And definitely check out Odyssey. I think they're the only brand right now supporting Odyssey in receivers, because they're the only ones that have enough processing power to do it. So you got to give Denon credit for not dropping Odyssey and then coming out with some lame room correction system claiming it's better.
I know, right?
You know, so yeah, I say there's a lot of there's more pros than cons on this receiver, and it's definitely should be at the top of your list if you're looking to one day upgrade to Atmos and Oro.
Yeah, Oro, exactly. Awesome, Gene. Well, thank you so much for this, and we invite you to go ahead and visit Audioholics.com for more complete reviews like this one, and also sign up to our free newsletter. And for signing up to our newsletter, you also get our nice ebook on the top 2014 AV gear, and we'll have a 2015 AV gear guide too.
It's coming, so sign up to our newsletter, you'll get it.
Absolutely. Anyways, with that said, until next time, keep listening.